Well, at the very, very start, and the first episodes of my podcast are about this, at the very start, it was assumed, of course, to be normal. Anytime you see a rabbit, you assume it's a normal rabbit. And then only later do you find out it was a, cyber controlled mechanical rabbit or
Mhm.
something. Um, in this case, we thought it was a normal rabbit.
Mhm.
And we assumed that it had probably crashed into the South China Sea where it was last observed, which is ultimately what happened to Air France 447. Only later did in the days that followed, more and more strange things happen. There were so many twists and turns in this case. It was really
Mhm.
like compelling TV drama where you have, okay, first of all, it turns out that even though the thing had gone electronically dark, it had then been seen on Malaysian military radar, making a turn back, going back the way it had come, going up the Malacca Straits and disappearing. Then reemerging several minutes later on Inmarsat data. That took another week to be revealed. And then it was revealed that Inmarsat scientists had done these calculations that were mysterious and not really well explained at first, that determined where it had gone. So it was like pages of a book being turned. The nature of the case continually seemed to change, and we had to
Yeah.
kind of adapt in those first days. So, but I think we very quickly realized, well, this is not like any other aviation accident we've ever seen. This is strange. I very early thought it went north based on almost nothing, but just my intuition has always been that if the plane went south, it was a suicide mission. Like whoever did this was their ultimate goal was to die.
Mhm.
And it also became clear really early that this was an elaborate, sophisticated, motivated action that had at least a layer of deception about it. And so
Mhm.
those things to me seemed fundamentally contradictory. Like, why would you go to such lengths in order to just die? Now, there have been a handful of cases where pilots have crashed their planes and committed suicide, mass murder suicide, I would say, because of course they're taking their passengers and crew with them. But there has never been a case where someone has wanted to die, but in a super elaborate way. A couple of weeks after the plane disappeared, the Australian authorities revealed that the scientists at Inmarsat had done some mathematics and determined that the plane had gone to the southern Indian Ocean. I and the other people who were kind of observing this online and in the media were we didn't understand it. They hadn't released the details yet. Ultimately, they published a scientific paper. In fact, they wound up publishing a whole book about their methodology. So we know
Yeah.
quite a lot about how the Australians made their decision, why they made their decision, and it's quite logically rigorous. I mean, I understand quite well why they assumed that it went to the southern seabed, and it's not irrational. I mean, it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense. But I started to ask, I was still troubled by this idea that somebody had done something very elaborate and sophisticated in order to die.
Mhm.
And so the question I asked myself was, is there any other way that this data could have been generated? Is there any sort of escape hatch from this otherwise inescapable conclusion that the plane went south? And I found that indeed there was a possibility. This plane actually had a number of characteristics which were unusual taken together, but which would allow this data to be maliciously altered. Essentially, what I was positing was a cyber attack, a cyber hijack. And this was met with great skepticism, I would say, almost
Mhm.
alarm. I was kicked out of this sort of informal group of self-described experts called the Independent Group, which had become quite influential
Mhm.
in the media and amongst search officials. This group was thanked by name in the final Australian report. But this caused a lot of concern because they felt like, okay, we've used math to understand what happened to this plane. We don't appreciate you trying to cast doubt on our certainty.
Mhm.
And indeed, I have been trying to cast doubt on certainty. I predicted back in 2015 that if this was a cyber attack, then this data that indicates a southward trajectory for the plane could have been falsified. If that's the case, then you won't find the plane on the southern seabed. Now, I made that call at a time when everybody, like literally everybody, believed that the plane had gone south. The mathematics shows quite unequivocally that the plane went south. And so to suggest that that might not be the case was heretical, I would say. So there's three things that for someone to steal MH370 in the way that it vanished, they would need to do three things. They would need to take control of communications. So that they would need to prevent the co-pilot and captain from calling for, help. They would need to control the flight surfaces, meaning they would need to be able to turn the plane left, right, go up and down, control the engines and so forth. And they would also need to be able to alter the data sent to the Inmarsat satellite that would then create this trail of electronic breadcrumbs that would leave the false impression that the plane had flown south when it actually was flying north. All three of these things, I suggest, are possible by physically infiltrating the electronics bay. The thing that we all need to agree on is that the search for MH370 has failed. And the people who are telling you in 2014, oh, we have a complete, perfect understanding of this, we know exactly where to look, let us take your tax dollars and we will give you the plane, those people were wrong. And I was telling you the opposite, and I was correct. My prediction was right. And so rather than cling to your sense of certainty, which has frankly disappointed you, you need to cast your gaze further. You need to think about, why did you get it wrong? And if you think it's somewhere beyond, I think the reason, Rebecca, we originally started to have this conversation is that people were saying, oh, we should continue the seabed search. We should look further on the seabed. To which my response was, there is no analytical basis for looking anywhere further on the seabed. All of the places on the seabed where your data told you this plane might be have already been searched, and the plane isn't there.
Yeah.
So instead of pressing on, unthinkingly, unquestioningly, it's time to stop what you're doing, question your sense of certainty, admit to yourself that there's a guy who predicted all of this 10 years ago, and we've been ignoring him and poo-pooing him and saying without basis that this is impossible, when it is simply, that is not correct. It is not true. And I would also point out that in this environment, we've already established, and I don't think this is controversial at this point, that we live in a polluted information environment, which is just rife with malicious misinformation. There will be developments to come. I just recently collected my own first Lepus antiphora barnacle data from a drifter buoy. It's in the mail to me right now from a volunteer I contacted in Hawaii who got a drifter after it washed ashore, and is sending to me. So the process is underway. We will have updates for you about the marine biology data. We will have updates for you about the discussion amongst cybersecurity experts. This is not, I think it's easy to get the impression that this has stalled out, that we're stuck in a mud, our wheels are spinning. That is not the case. There are things that we can do, and we are doing them.